The smell of sunscreen and cheap margaritas was still lingering in the air when I got the call. "Your camper's gone." At first, I thought it was a prank. Then came the photo. Karen, oversized sunglasses, straw hat, and a tank top that read "Hot Mess Express," posing in front of my DEA mobile lab with a margarita in one hand and her little dog in the other. She captioned it "Road Tripping in Style, Baby." That was the moment I realized Karen didn't just take my camper. She hijacked an active federal crime lab, drove it across state lines, and broadcasted it on social media for the entire cartel network to see. Let's rewind. I'm not your typical suburban guy with a weekend RV. I'm Mason Reed, and I work for the DEA, embedded in a mobile operations unit. My job involves analyzing substances, setting up quick response command centers, and occasionally tailing suspects using a custom-built vehicle that looks like a beat-up camper from the outside, but inside is more high-tech than most police departments. My cover in this town was clean, mild-mannered federal agriculture consultant who occasionally camped alone to clear his head. I even let my beard grow out and bought a fishing hat to complete the illusion. Nobody, especially not the HOA, knew the real reason that campers stay behind a locked fence on my property at all times. Nobody except Karen, or at least she thought she knew. She'd been complaining to the HOA about it since the day I moved in. "It's an eyesore. It's too close to the street. What are you even doing in there?" "Cooking meth," she once said with a laugh that didn't sound like a joke. I always responded with polite warnings. "It's not safe to be near it. It's classified government property. Please don't touch it." But Karen was the kind of person who believed rules were for other people, especially if she could find a way to twist them for her benefit. She'd been fined for planting unauthorized rose bushes in her front yard, tried to host a block party in someone else's driveway, and once left a flamingo lawn ornament in my flower bed as some sort of passive-aggressive protest. The week before the theft, Karen had been especially nosy. She saw me loading what looked like a large cooler into the camper and immediately started asking questions. "Going fishing?" she asked, with that predatory smile that made my skin crawl. I ignored her. What I was actually loading was a secure sample unit containing fentanyl derivatives from a recent bust, materials that could be deadly with the smallest exposure. I knew the lab was secure. Biometric locks, hidden GPS, backup surveillance. Still, I added a motion-triggered alert to my phone just to be safe. That alert went off 3 days later, and within seconds my world turned inside out. The camera footage was blurry, but clear enough to show Karen entering my property with a toolbox, prying open the fence gate, and somehow bypassing the entry scanner. Later, I found out she'd seen me punch in a code once while pretending to walk her dog and guessed the rest from the smudges on the keypad. The audacity alone was maddening, but the consequences were far worse. The camper wasn't just a lab. It had recently been used to store active surveillance data on a cartel shipment coming through the Gulf. It had sensitive files, communication gear, and active tags that could draw retaliation if discovered. If that vehicle fell into the wrong hands, it wouldn't just be a theft. It would be an act of national sabotage. I contacted my handler, Director Payton, immediately. "You need to track it now." The line went quiet. Then came the words, "We've already seen it. It's on TikTok." The video was short but devastating. Karen and her group of middle-aged gal pals clinking glasses in the camper, raving about the leather seats and how this baby drives like a dream. In the background, my secure workstation was clearly visible, with monitors blinking red from unauthorized login. One of them was using the evidence table as a cheese platter. We tried to trace the signal, but Karen's bright idea of unplugging the annoying beeping thing disabled the vehicle's GPS tracker. She covered over the plates with a beach towel. What she hadn't counted on was the onboard ad I'd rate for motion detection and logging. While the location was jammed, the feed was still storing encrypted bursts to satellite backup. I accessed the feed and got glimpses: beachside motel, diners, a fireworks store, and even a stop outside a discount day spa. It was like watching a parody of The Real Housewives Go Rogue. Meanwhile, the DEA was in full crisis mode. The camper had been logged as temporarily inactive for local analysis, meaning it wasn't under immediate protection. That meant my mistake. My assumption that no one would be stupid enough to steal it was now a real operational risk. We couldn't just roll in with a black SUV and yank it back without drawing press or questions, especially if Karen had no idea what she was messing with. And let's be clear, she didn't. She thought she'd won a battle against RV hoarders, or whatever made-up HOA rule she imagined applied to me. But what Karen didn't know was that her little act of entitlement was about to collide with a real cartel trail that had just gone hot. The files inside that lab had facial recognition data, license plates, names, and now, because Karen had live-streamed her vacation like an influencer with no impulse control, the people we were investigating were noticing. My feed lit up with comments in Spanish, translating to "That's the van. She has it. Find her." In the war room, agents argued over whether to intercept now or wait and follow. Director Payton turned to me and said, "You're going to love this." She just tagged herself at a coastal parade in Seabreeze County, wearing DEA sunglasses she found in your glove compartment. I slammed my hands on the table. She's wearing government-issued gear while parading an active field unit through a crowd. The room fell quiet. Then someone laughed. I didn't. I volunteered to go in personally. I knew the equipment. I knew Karen. But more importantly, I knew that this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was damage control. If even one of those cartel lookouts spotted the camper again, Karen's girls' trip wouldn't end in HOA complaints or community service. It would end in headlines and blood. By the time I boarded the surveillance chopper, Karen had already posted 2 more videos. One from inside the camper's shower unit, another from the rooftop ladder yelling "America, baby," while waving a beach towel. I leaned back in my seat and muttered, "Karen, you just became the most dangerous idiot in the country." And I was coming to get her back, not to save her, to stop a war. The sun beat down mercilessly on the open highway as Karen barreled down Route 17 in the stolen camper, completely oblivious to the chaos she had unleashed. She was sipping a smoothie she picked up from a roadside shack, one hand on the wheel and the other scrolling through Instagram filters. Her friends Bonnie and Denise were lounging in the back, flipping through magazines and tossing snacks around like they were on a spa retreat. The camper was no longer just a vehicle. It was now their personal freedom cruiser, as Karen proudly named it. Freedom from rules, from the HOA, and most importantly, from that weird bearded neighbor who thought he owned the block. She had no idea she'd stolen something hotter than a military-grade missile launcher. The camper's internal systems, though partially disabled, were still operational on a passive level. Every time Karen flipped a switch, something somewhere logged the action. She had no clue that the fridge she had just turned off was actually a temperature-controlled unit designed to stabilize volatile compounds. She also didn't know that the drawer she'd been using to store crackers contained forensic materials tagged from a recent border drug bust, and the screen in the back, which she now used to play Ninity's music videos on loop, had recently displayed a cartel's regional logistics map. Every click she made was like setting a mousetrap in a fireworks warehouse. Meanwhile, I was en route in a blacked-out SUV, coordinating with local authorities to ensure a clean retrieval operation. The DEA had switched from panic to full protocol mode, and I was running point. Not because it was personal, though it absolutely was, but because I knew every inch of that camper, and every inch now carried federal liability. The agency wanted her stopped quietly and quickly before this spiraled into a diplomatic disaster. There was already chatter on the darknet, encrypted messages referencing the Ghost Lab and the white RV with the green trim. Someone had spotted her outside a gas station in Little Largo. That someone had a known connection to a Gulf-based trafficking ring. When I pulled into the sheriff's department in Seabreeze County, I was greeted by a short, round man named Deputy Rodriguez who looked like he spent more time at donut shops than in high-speed chases. He shook my hand while squinting against the sun. "So you're telling me this lady didn't just steal a camper?" "She stole like a Transformer lab." I nodded. "Think of it as a nuclear briefcase with wheels, and she's streaming it on Facebook like it's a home makeover show." He whistled, then muttered, "She's in for it." The plan was to follow, not intercept. We've been able to access Karen's phone location thanks to her tagging herself publicly in nearly every post. Our drone feed picked up the camper parked outside a combination massage parlor and bingo hall, where she and her friends were now arguing over who got the next foot rub. One of the women had already opened a compartment labeled "Do Not Touch," assuming it was a makeup drawer. Inside were heat-sealed samples of narcotic powder, now scattered across the carpet. A few more bumps in the road and they'd have inhaled enough to need a helicopter evac. At headquarters, the analysts were going mad. One was decoding a recent live video where Karen had shown off her fancy science gear. In the background, an open laptop displayed encrypted files marked classified. She had zoomed in to brag about how techy it looked, not knowing she just revealed a DEA informant list on a paused screen. The implications were enormous. The cartel didn't even need to hack us. Karen had practically delivered sensitive field intel in a party bus. My superior called and said, if this leaks any further, it's not just her getting arrested. It's going to be a congressional hearing. But Karen? Karen was busy planning her next stop. According to her latest post, she was headed to a beach carnival in Pelican Bay. We're bringing the party to the sand, babes, she yelled into her phone, panning the camera from her margarita to the decked-out camper, where she taped glitter streamers and stuck inflatable flamingos on the roof. That's when I saw something else, a familiar figure, blurred in the background, standing too still to be a random tourist. He was wearing sunglasses, staring directly at the camera, and holding a phone like he was taking a photo. The cartel scouts were watching. That was the moment the mission changed. We now had to assume they were following her, possibly tracking her, maybe even planning to intercept the camper themselves. If they realized what was inside, they might try to take her, the camper, or both. Not because they cared about Karen. They didn't. But that data, those devices, that evidence, it was enough to dismantle one of their main hubs if used right, or destroy years of work if it fell into the wrong hands. I relayed the updated intel to Central Command. We upgraded the mission status to intercept and secure. No longer just observe. Time was running out. I made contact with 2 local officers, and we set up a soft perimeter around the upcoming carnival site. We couldn't risk a full-scale operation with civilians around. Instead, we used crowd control as a cover, blend in, and wait for Karen to arrive. A side team would sweep for possible cartel agents already embedded in the area. It felt like a tactical operation from a spy movie, except our villain wasn't a genius arms dealer. She was a wine-loving suburban menace who thought she was starring in a road trip comedy. On the way to Pelican Bay, I watched another video pop up on her social feed. This time she was on top of the camper, dancing with a beach towel, shouting, "I should run for AOA president of the whole coast." Her voice slurred slightly. In the background, a canister rocked loose from a shelf and rolled down the side of the vehicle. It was silver, unmarked, and definitely not something you'd want bouncing onto concrete. My stomach sank. The footage cut off abruptly as the feed glitched. Then silence. I turned to Deputy Rodriguez and said, "We're not waiting anymore." He nodded, flipped the siren switch, and we sped off. Karen had just danced her way into the eye of a federal hurricane, and now everyone from the DEA to the cartel was closing in. The only question left was who'd reach her first. Pelican Bay was already in full swing when we rolled into town. The sun had turned the sand into a frying pan, and the boardwalk was pulsing with beach music, carnival rides, and the smell of funnel cakes mingling with sunscreen and sea breeze. Families milled around in sun hats and flip-flops. Kids ran with dripping popsicles, and the atmosphere screamed summer fun. No one could have guessed a federal disaster was quietly careening straight into the crowd behind the wheel of a stolen DEA mobile lab. We spotted the camper before we even saw Karen. It was impossible to miss. She'd gone all in on her coastal queen fantasy and turned the once stealthy gray RV into a glitter-covered monstrosity. There were paper lanterns strung across the roof, plastic flamingos zip-tied to the front grille, and pool noodles duct-taped around the doorframe. Loud pop music blasted from portable speakers perched on the roof, and lawn chairs were set up around the vehicle like it was the star attraction at a beachside parade. She even painted a slogan across the side in what looked like nail polish: Karen's Cruise Cabin. Karen and her friends had already made themselves at home. Bonnie was passed out in a beach chair with a margarita still in her hand, while Denise filmed a dance routine beside the camper's open rear doors, broadcasting it live on social media. Karen herself stood proudly on a foldable table, giving what she must have thought was an inspiring speech. Let this be the summer we take back our freedom. No HOA rules, no curfews, no campers left behind. She raised her drink in a mock salute, and the crowd of strangers actually cheered. Most thought it was part of some elaborate party act. None of them knew the camper held volatile narcotics, surveillance data, and enough encrypted files to start a congressional investigation. I kept my distance, blending into the crowd with a baseball cap and aviators. Deputy Rodriguez trailed behind me, trying to act casual but failing miserably every time he winced at the techno music or tried to avoid stepping on discarded glow sticks. Our backup team was already stationed at key points near the boardwalk exit and carnival games, just in case we needed to lock things down fast. The problem wasn't spotting Karen. The problem was what to do with her without causing a stampede of confused tourists or, worse, alerting the wrong people because the cartel scouts were here. I'd already spotted two. One stood near the lemonade stand pretending to browse t-shirts. The other was seated on a bench, watching Karen's crew with a gaze far too focused for someone trying to enjoy a beach day. They were both using burner phones and discreet earpieces, a dead giveaway to anyone who knew what to look for. They hadn't made a move yet, probably still trying to confirm that the camper was the same vehicle from the surveillance drop last week. But it wouldn't take them long. Karen had once again gone live, panning around the camper's interior, showing off the super cool lab stuff, which included sealed vials, a glowing control panel, and a microscope now repurposed as a wine glass holder. I wanted to scream. The risk of a public confrontation was too high, but the longer we waited, the worse it got. As I watched the live stream on my burner phone, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. One of the compartments in the back had been forced open. Karen had pried it loose with a metal spatula. Inside was the secure narcotics sample vault. It was open. Empty vials were rolling around the floor. Director Payton's voice came through the earpiece almost immediately. "Contain it now." I gave the signal to Rodriguez, who tapped his radio twice. The agents in position began moving in silently, surrounding the perimeter of the boardwalk with calculated precision. Meanwhile, I made my way toward the camper, weaving through a crowd that was completely oblivious to the incoming storm. Karen had just turned back toward the camera when I stepped into view, standing a few feet from her makeshift throne. She blinked, squinting at me through her oversized sunglasses. "Oh, look who it is," she said loudly, slurring just enough to give away how much tequila was in her bloodstream. "Mr. Camperman, did you come to join the fun after all?" Her audience laughed. I didn't respond. I kept walking forward. Karen must have thought I was bluffing because she kept filming, holding the phone right in my face. "Hey, Internet, this is my grumpy neighbor who doesn't believe in joy." I reached past her and hit the button that shut off the live stream. The silence that followed was brief and brutal. Karen lowered the phone slowly and finally seemed to register something serious was going on. My face. The agents now closing in around the carnival. The sudden presence of men with earpieces who weren't smiling. She looked around and whispered, "Wait, is this about the camper?" Her voice was already losing confidence. "Karen," I said flatly, "you stole a federal mobile lab. You tampered with narcotics. You exposed confidential files, and you brought it all here to a crowded beach." She stared, then scoffed. "No, I didn't. That thing was just sitting there. I thought it was abandoned. Besides, you never said it was federal." "I did, multiple times." "Well, how was I supposed to know you were serious?" she shouted. "You look like a high school janitor." I motioned to the agents, and within seconds, Karen was gently but firmly taken by the arms. The crowd still thought it was some weird performance. Karen began to resist, flailing in protest. "This is kidnapping. I know my rights. This is about the HOA, isn't it? I pay my dues. The agents ignored her. Denise dropped her phone in shock. Bonnie snored softly, still asleep in her chair. As we secured the area, one of the agents near the perimeter radioed in, "We've got movement. Cartel boys are walking fast toward the target." My heart jumped. I ran toward the beach exit and spotted them. Two men moving with purpose, no longer pretending to be tourists. One had a hand tucked inside his jacket. "Go loud," I shouted. Now, everything happened at once. Agents rushed in from both sides. The two men froze for a second, then bolted. One of them threw his phone into the sand and made a break for the boardwalk stairs. A tackle ended that sprint in seconds. The other was stopped by a taser and went down with a dramatic grunt. Beachgoers screamed, kids cried. Karen, still restrained, shouted, "Are they with you? Are those your friends too?" It took 20 minutes to secure the site. Local law enforcement helped us evacuate the beach and clear out the carnival section. The camper was impounded and sealed. Karen was handcuffed and taken to a temporary holding unit, while the DEA prepped formal charges. Her expression had shifted from smugged to terrified. I stood by the camper's back door, surveying the damage. One of the flamingos was bent sideways. Litter stuck to every surface. The wine had stained half the countertop, but the systems were intact. Somehow, against every odd, nothing had exploded. Karen had no idea how close she came to setting off a chain reaction that could have ended in real bloodshed. And yet she still asked, as we walked her to the transport van, "So am I going to get a warning or something?" I didn't answer. I just shut the door behind her. The ride back to headquarters was quiet, except for Karen's occasional bursts of confusion and entitlement echoing from the holding area in the rear of the transport van. She had cycled through every stage: denial, rage, bargaining, and now hovered somewhere between false confidence and incoherent rambling. "You're making a mistake," she said again for the 10th time. "I know the mayor. He's at my Pilates class. He's going to hear about this." No one responded. The agent sitting across from her simply glanced at his notes without a word. Karen's outrage had long since lost its novelty. What none of us said aloud was that she was extremely lucky to be sitting in that van instead of zipped into a body bag. If the cartel agents had reached her first, there wouldn't have been any live streams or margarita jokes, just silence and blood. Back at the regional command center, I was pulled into a debrief room with glass walls, a sterile whiteboard covered in scrambled timelines, and several printouts of Karen's social media posts arranged like evidence in a courtroom. Across the room, a pair of DEA supervisors discussed jurisdictional fallout. "We'll have to report the breach up the chain," one said. "There's no way this doesn't get flagged by internal OP." She showed the informant board in full view of a live stream. The other shook her head. "And the vials? We're lucky she didn't pop one open on camera. That would have been an international headline." I sat down, still shaking off the adrenaline. The truth was, I was angry. At Karen, at myself, at the way a single lapse in security protocol had turned a neighborhood nuisance into a national security breach. For weeks I'd underestimated her, thinking she was just another overbearing, HOA-obsessed loudmouth with too much free time and too little common sense. But Karen wasn't just annoying. She was dangerous, not because she meant to be, but because she believed that the rules didn't apply to her, that her whims were more important than warnings, that borrowing a locked vehicle wasn't theft, just community repurposing. She was the walking embodiment of delusion, weaponized by Wi-Fi and wine coolers. We went through the footage. Every moment, from her beach parade to her clumsy entry into the camper, was now part of a growing case file. The eye in the camper had recorded hours of video and environmental data. I watched as she opened drawers clearly labeled in red warning text, laughed about fancy science toys, and used a sterile sample tray as a natural platter. In one moment, she even spilled salsa on a portable scanner and wiped it off with her skirt, giggling. That scanner, incidentally, was one of the most advanced chemical analyzers in the DEA's mobile fleet. Her skirt left behind traces of glitter and lotion that would take forensic techs hours to remove. Outside the room, agents were processing the cartel scouts we'd arrested. One had a burner phone loaded with photos of the camper taken earlier that day, along with GPS coordinates and a decrypted message reading, "Retrieve asset quietly." That confirmed what we'd feared. They weren't following Karen to attack her. They were following the camper to steal it back. They knew what was inside, and they had been planning to intercept. If we hadn't moved when we did, there's no doubt in my mind they would have made their move. Probably at night, probably fast, and probably with Karen and her friends left in a ditch somewhere afterward. Later that afternoon, Karen was brought into an interrogation room. The glass on our side was mirrored. I watched as she was seated, her arms crossed tightly, lip curled into the same defensive smirk she always wore when the HOA sent her a notice about her illegal holiday light displays. A federal agent sat across from her, clipboard in hand. The conversation started simple. "What's your full name?" he asked. "Karen Dolores Whitman, and I demand a lawyer." "You'll get one. We're just asking questions to clarify the situation." "I didn't steal anything," she said quickly. "It was parked on the street. That's public access. Look it up. It was behind a locked gate on private property." "Well, the gate was old. It basically fell open. You pried it open with a crowbar." She blinked. Semantics. The agent didn't flinch. "Do you know what a Schedule II controlled substance is?" She shrugged. "Sounds like a diet plan." The interrogation went on for hours, Karen alternating between arrogance and confusion, seemingly unaware of the gravity of her situation. When shown photos of the cartel scouts who had tracked her, she scoffed. "I don't know those guys. They look like your friends." When shown footage of her opening the secure sample vault, she rolled her eyes. "Why would you put something important in a camper, then leave it unlocked? That's on you." Eventually, she was charged with a long list of federal crimes: interfering with a federal investigation, unauthorized possession of classified material, reckless endangerment, theft of government property, and, ironically, resisting arrest. Her defense was, as expected, she thought the camper was just sitting there, thought it was abandoned, thought it was all a misunderstanding. When asked why she broadcasted herself inside what was clearly a professional lab, she answered, "Because I have fans. They like my content." Outside the room, one of the supervising agents turned to me and said, "You think she really didn't know?" I shook my head. She didn't want to know. That's the problem. We loaded the camper into a secure warehouse that night. It took hours to sanitize the interior and begin restoring the systems she had tampered with. The flamingos were peeled off, the glitter vacuumed, the salsa stains bleached. Technicians found lipstick inside a fiber optic port and a broken earring in a chemical tray. One forensic specialist pulled out a half-eaten granola bar that had been jammed into the evidence scanner, muttering, "This woman is chaos incarnate." But the worst discovery came later. Tucked behind a cabinet she had pried open, it was a tiny USB drive, part of a surveillance backup cage. One of Karen's friends had unplugged it, thinking it was a music stick, and loaded it into her laptop to see if it had any songs. She never uploaded anything from it, but that small act of digital exposure had triggered a foreign pain. Somewhere in Central America, a known cartel affiliate tried to remotely access the content. The attempt failed, but it confirmed we weren't just dealing with local stupidity anymore. We had stumbled into an international mess created entirely by one woman's unchecked audacity. By the time I left the facility that night, the sun had long since set, and the buzz of beach music had faded into memory. Karen was behind bars, awaiting transfer to a federal detention center. The camper was locked up, repaired, and now guarded like a nuclear vault. And I was tired, not from the chase or the cleanup, but from the sheer ridiculousness of it all. One woman, one borrowed crowbar, and the blind confidence to believe she could take what wasn't hers just because it looked fun. She'd gone from HOA nuisance to federal felon in less than 72 hours. And somehow she was still convinced she was the victim. I had a feeling this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters filled the back rows. A few sketch artists hunched over their pads, and nearly half the audience seemed to be people from Karen's neighborhood. Some there out of morbid curiosity, others to finally see the woman who had driven their HOA insane go down in flames. I watched from a reserved seat near the front, flanked by 2 DEA agents in plain clothes. Karen was led and wearing a pale blue suit that was far too bright for the occasion, trying to look dignified but unable to hide the nervous tapping of her fingers on the defense table. Her attorney sat beside her, clearly exhausted before things had even started. She whispered something to him. He didn't look up. The judge entered, and the room quieted with the kind of tension you only feel before something historic or catastrophic begins. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the facts. The theft of government property, the breach of a secure mobile laboratory, the exposure of sensitive materials, the reckless endangerment of public civilians at a populated beach, and most damning of all, the inadvertent compromise of an active DEA surveillance operation. Video clips from Karen's live streams played without sound. There she was, dancing with a flamingo on the camper roof, panning over secured files with a bottle of wine in her hand, laughing while one of her friends attempted to pop open a sealed vault with a butter knife. The jury sat still, faces unmoved. The evidence wasn't just overwhelming. It was embarrassing. Karen had practically documented her entire crime spree with commentary and musical background. Her defense argued temporary insanity, a misunderstanding, and the claim that she thought the camper was abandoned. They suggested that the federal government bore some blame for leaving something so sensitive so unattended. But that argument didn't hold under cross-examination. When asked if she knew what a restricted government notice looked like, Karen answered yes. When asked why she ignored the multiple security signs plastered all over the interior, she shrugged and claimed she thought it was part of the aesthetic. The prosecutor's voice sharpened. You thought red stenciled warnings, biometric locks, and secured storage containers were aesthetic. Karen replied, well, it looked like a movie set, like something from a CSI episode. Laughter almost broke out in the courtroom, but the judge cut it short. I couldn't tell if Karen was clueless or just committed to the delusion that this was all some bizarre mistake that would blow over if she just kept smiling. But as the trial went on, that smile faded. Every witness that testified made it harder for her to maintain the image she wanted. The forensic expert who explained how close she came to triggering a chemical reaction that could have knocked out half the carnival. The DEA tech who revealed that her posts had led to an attempted cyber breach from an international cartel cell. And me, when I stood and explained everything from the moment the camper disappeared to the moment she was zip-tied mid-scream in front of a crowd of tourists and inflatable ducks. The courtroom fell completely silent when I was asked what could have happened had we not intervened in time. I told the truth. If the cartel had intercepted her, there would have been casualties. If the sample vials had been opened, there could have been mass exposure. If the files had been fully accessed, the entire operation we've been working on for 2 years could have unraveled in a single week. Karen lowered her head then, not in shame but in what looked like genuine shock. It finally seemed to hit her that this wasn't just about borrowing someone's camper. It was about national security. The trial lasted 4 days. By the end, the jury didn't even take 2 hours to deliberate. They returned with a verdict that was as clear as it was inevitable. Guilty on all counts. Karen's face barely moved as it was read aloud. Maybe she thought she'd get a slap on the wrist. Maybe she still believed she was untouchable. But as the judge prepared to issue the sentence, Karen's voice broke through the quiet courtroom. "This isn't fair," she blurted. "I didn't hurt anyone. I just wanted a vacation." The judge looked at her, expressionless. "You almost caused an international incident," he said. "You treated federal property like a party bus. This isn't about what you wanted. It's about what you did." She was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters whispered into microphones. Neighbors exchanged shocked glances, and Karen was led out the same way she came in, surrounded by people she didn't understand, facing consequences she never believed would apply to her. In the days that followed, the internet erupted. Clips from the trial went viral. One moment in particular, where Karen shouted, "This is a beach camper, not a war machine," became the punchline of a dozen parody videos. A meme of her holding up a wine bottle next to classified files was captioned, "When Karen meets Homeland Security." News outlets ran with headlines like Beach Bimbo Busted by the Feds and From HOA Queen to Federal Inmate. Reddit threads exploded, people swapping their own Karen encounters and speculating on what she'd do in prison. One commenter joked, "She'll be running the warden's office by next month." Back at the agency, the fallout was both serious and strange. We instituted new security protocols for all mobile labs. Keypad locks were replaced with remote-activated biometric scanners. All external appearances were modified to avoid even the slightest hint of RV culture. And yet, some good came from the fiasco. The cartel we were monitoring had clearly exposed one of their tech cells by trying to access Karen's live stream footage. That slip gave us the last piece we needed to execute a coordinated takedown. A month later, 10 arrests were made across 3 cities. Major supply lines were shut down. It was the kind of breakthrough we've been chasing for years. Ironically, Karen's stupidity had helped bring it home. As for me, I was promoted to lead mobile operations supervisor. The new camper I was assigned came with a full exterior wrap that made it look like a plumbing company van. No one gave it a second glance. And yes, I added a special little warning sticker inside just for nostalgia. It read, "Karen Proof Tested." Months later, I visited the neighborhood just once more. The house next to mine had been sold. A young couple had moved in. Quiet, friendly, respectful. They had a small dog and a grill out front. No wine fountains, no pink lawn flamingos, no screaming about HOA bylaws. Just peace. As I walked by the old fence where the camper used to be parked, I smiled. That gate had since been reinforced with steel latches and surveillance drones. I passed it, then turned back one last time. A bird flew overhead. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a backyard barbecue. For a moment, I almost missed the chaos. Almost.